Welcome to the Love Your Inner Athlete podcast, your go-to source for all things mental fitness in sports. Whether you're an athlete, coach, or parent, you will learn as you join us to dive into inspiring conversations with those who have worked to develop their mental fitness. You will hear from people who have put in the work as either an athlete, coach, or a parent. In each episode, we bring you discussions and expert insights on developing resilience, focus, and mindset. Discover the concepts of mental fitness and learn how to use it to create consistent, durable confidence in both sports and life. I'm your host, Hans Schulstad. Let's get started. Welcome to the Inner Athlete podcast, where we talk with experts in mental fitness, coaches, athletes, providers that we have worked with over the years. Happy to be joined today by Bjorn Carlson, a fellow MIAC athlete. Bjorn and I met, is it close to 10 years ago?
Yeah, probably 10, 11, 12 years.
How old was Hobie, my son? Maybe 10?
Yeah, maybe, I think 9 or 10.
Yeah. The way that Bjorn and I met was having a lot of athletes come to my office that were working with me that were talking about the work they were doing at the Vision Performance Center. And I noticed that their ability to regulate their emotions and their performance was getting a lot better. So I wanted to know why. And so my son and I went down to the Vision Performance Center, got some eye exams, and then we did the sports vision training program. And that helped me to learn how the work that they do there really helps athletes and people. And I learned a ton about like concussion recovery and all the different things that can happen with not your eyesight, but your vision. So we're happy to have him on today. I think a lot of you will learn a lot from what he has to talk about. So let's get started. First question I have for you is, you tell me how you ended up becoming a vision performance specialist and how you got involved with where you're at now.
Yeah, so it started out, so I graduated from St. Olaf College and I was an exercise science major. And after school, I had a couple avenues I was exploring, whether it's going to be go to PT school or exercise physiology or strength and conditioning. And I kind of fell into this vision therapy world, running into a couple people, random places, one at a grocery store, one at a peer performance lecture on athletics. Just kind of fell into the position and have now been here for 15 years.
What drew you into that field of vision training?
Yeah, so I always wanted to do something with coaching and working with athletes. I was a four-sport athlete in high school and played soccer in college and taught at a tennis camp in the summer throughout college. So I wanted to do something with sports, and I've always been fascinated with anatomy and especially the brain. So this vision therapy and sports vision training and concussion rehabilitation just kind of drew me in because it hit every single one of those marks. Just kind of got it excited about the profession. And again, have been at the same job for 15 years right out of college, which isn't very common for my generation.
That's true. So how have you seen the field of vision performance or training change or evolve over time?
Yeah, when I first started, a lot of our vision therapy was more for academics. So kids who struggle with reading or skip lines when they're reading, or they get headaches, or sometimes the words on the page move. And we found that little Johnny going through vision therapy for academics, well, he could hit a baseball then. He could ride a bike or he could catch a ball. So our program kind of evolved and specialized in this sports vision training, and a lot of the same bread and butter materials we do with the academic side of vision therapy and the sports vision therapy or sports vision training, we just add a more dynamic piece. So as we found out our students were making improvements in their athletics, we kind of made a specialized area where we focused on just the performance enhancement, getting from point A to point B, or if you wanted to be a B player to an A player or a JV player to varsity, or going from high school to college or even college to pro, there's always that little bit more that you can do to give you that visual edge.
Can you tell me more about like how that works, how it impacts athletic performance, and why is it a area of performance that is often not thought of?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty common sense. I mean, you train the rest of the body, you can do the same thing for the eyes and the brain. And it's not necessarily strengthening the muscles of the eyes. It's relaying information from the eyes to the brain to set the body in motion. So if you're able to process faster or react faster, obviously that's going to lead to higher success in sports. But you also look at a lot of the skills you need. You need to be able to, let's say we're talking hockey. You need to be able to track a puck. You need to be aware in your periphery. You need to be able to multitask and divide your attention. And if you have a better or stronger visual system and your brain processes faster, again, that's going to lead to higher success on the ice or the field or the court or whatever sport you're playing.
So, does the work you do include high level athletes?
Yeah, so we work with everything from the youth sports all the way to professional athletes. And even in the professional world, we're in the NHL working with one of the goalie coaches. He said the best goalie in the NHL and the worst goalie in the NHL, the difference between them is only an eyelash. And if you can just get that little extra edge, sometimes that could bring you from AHL to NHL or average player in the NHL to all-star in the NHL.
Well, okay, wow. So, well, I bet that's really fun working with those NHL players and teams.
Oh yeah. It's a lot of fun. And just to see how, I mean, obviously the guys have to work so hard to get there. And majority of the guys that we've worked with at that level, they're so receptive. They say, okay, what can I do to get better? I know my teammates doing this. Now I want to do it. I want to drink the Kool-Aid just to, again, give me that little extra edge.
What would you say the most common visual processing problems or weaknesses you see in athletes? And like, if I've never been there, like I know what you do, but like, what would an athlete expect if they came to work with you guys there?
Sure. Yeah, it's pretty dependent on, again, if we're working with an injury, a concussion or not. But you look at the kind of the visual skills, the basic visual skills we test and we work on the tracking, being able to follow something that's moving, the saccadic eye movements, the ability to jump from one point to the other. You have your convergence, bringing the eyes in, your divergence, bringing the eyes out. Your accommodation or focusing system is that near far focus. And a lot of the athletes we see, and also I can identify a lot of personalities where a lot of athletes are type A, always going kind of flexors. So a lot of them kind of struggle with that relaxing or expanding the periphery. And you look at, as you're, again, following a puck, if you're so zeroed in on following that puck, a lot of times you can not be aware of whoever's coming to check you on the side. So I'd say the main thing that I see with my athletes is they're such good flexors. They just struggle with that relaxing or kind of expanding their periphery. And that's a big thing that we work on.
Oh, so you end up teaching them, like, do they end up learning relaxation skills in other parts of their life or throughout their body?
Yeah, I guess you could say that too, where, again, I say, if, especially with our concussion patients too, they become so focally bound and they have to work so hard to focus on what they're doing. Is sometimes I say, just kind of expand your periphery, kind of relax your visual system. And that's kind of a calming technique that we work with some of the athletes too, is, during a whistle, just kind of looking across the ice or looking across the field and just kind of expanding your periphery, again, getting your breath rate down. But that's just kind of a thing that I've seen that's been important for all of our athletes.
I've often heard you say with your eyes, 1 + 1 does not equal 2. And I often say that to people when I'm asking them to check out your services. Can you explain what that means exactly?
Sure. Yeah. And that's a quote that Dr. McDonald, I'll give him the shout out. That's his quote that he says for every athlete and even the patients coming in, where you got the two eyes that connect to the brain. So 1 + 1 = 3. So I always say the eyes are an exterior component of the brain. So you've got 1 + 1 eye plus 1 eye plus the brain equals 3. And you have an exponential increase in activity when we are processing through the eyes. We're anywhere from 85 to 95% of what we process comes through the eyes. So you look at, I always like to give the example. You look at the 5 senses. You've got your sense of smell. You're not using very often as you're playing sports. Your sense of taste, again, not really using it. Your sense of hearing, a little bit, but it's your sense of touch. Again, you got to know where you are and your proprioception of where your body is in space. But obviously, a lot of what you're processing is coming out of that visual system. So if there's not a direct relay from the eyes to the brain to make your brain process or react, sometimes that can be the difference in making a save or hitting a baseball or catching a football or anything like that.
Okay. So if you're a parent or you're an athlete, like what are the things that people need to look for that would give them an idea of how much your services would benefit them? Like, what are some things that kind of show up and, maybe use in layman's terms about like, what parents or athletes can look for to figure out if there is some kind of deficiency?
Sure. Yeah. And I know, in the time that we've been working together, you've been great at identifying and, sending me a text saying, okay, so-and-so is doing this. Does that help? Sometimes the answer is no. A lot of times the answer is yes. Yep. So I think of one athlete in particular. He was a hockey player, good high school player, had good size, had good skill, but there was something missing, and coaches saw it, parents saw it, and it was just like, what is that thing that he was missing? And one of the things, as I talked about earlier, was the being so focused on what he was doing and always that flexor and kind of that intensity where as soon as he learned to kind of expand his peripheral vision, that took his game to a new level where he was able to multitask better. His divided attention was better. So it's sometimes where you're looking at all the pieces of what make a good athlete. And if there's just something that seems to not be clicking or they're not getting something, sometimes it is that visual deficiency, or there is a visual deficiency that they would need to address in order to take them to the next level.
So if an athlete comes to see you, walk me through the process of what they do, the time frame, and what happens from week to week.
Yeah, so typically we always require an athlete to have just a general eye exam, just to make sure the eye health is all good. There's no need for contacts or glasses, so their acuities are good. After that, we do a vision efficiency evaluation, or sometimes a sports vision evaluation. And for that eval, we measure, again, all the visual skills. We measure the acuities, we measure the tracking, the saccadic eye movements or jumps, the focusing, the visual strength and endurance. So their convergence, their divergence, their dynamic visual acuity, which, again, if you can see 20/20, can you see 20/20 while an object is in motion? And then we do other reaction time exercises, peripheral awareness exercises, and then another cool one that's kind of a divided attention and tracking exercise. So we have a whole grid that we follow in terms of our evaluation. And then what's kind of cool is we kind of highlight, we show, all right, everything in green, you met the expectation. Everything is in red is below the expectation. And that's kind of how we tailor our program, saying, all right, here's where you're deficient. Here's where we need to make the improvements. But similar to any training facility, let's say your lower body strength is not great. Well, you're still going to do upper body while you're doing your lower body. So same thing with the vision. If you're not a good converger, well, we're going to work on convergence. We're still going to work on divergence and the accommodation, kind of all those basic visual skills. So again, we've got the exam, we've got the evaluation, and then from there, we determine the training program based on if there is a medical diagnosis or based on the deficiencies, and we can't tailor it to each athlete's sport or just the improving of the overall athletic performance.
So how long does that take, and what does the athlete have to do?
Yeah, so typically our programs or our sports vision programs are anywhere between, we say, 10 to 12 or 10 to 20 weeks. I know you had sent me one goalie a few years ago, and we said he had a pretty good visual system, and we recommended maybe 12 sessions. He came for 42. He just wanted to keep coming, and he was like, okay, this is fun. I'm seeing the improvement. So our sports vision, if there is no medical diagnosis, again, it can be a little bit shorter length where we look at our academic vision therapy. If we're dealing with a diagnosis or a learning related visual problem, it's anywhere from 20 to 25 weeks. And then if we're dealing with a lazy eye or an eye turn or strabismus and amblyopia, sometimes those are anywhere from 20 to 40 weeks, kind of based on diving deeper into the neurology, if there are different acuities or if there is that lazy eye. And then our concussion program is anywhere from 18 to 100 weeks. Again, with a concussion patient, I always say if I've seen one concussion, I've seen one concussion patient, because they're all different. Symptoms are always different, and they always kind of progress throughout the program differently.
Okay. So does like the athlete like do homework in between weeks, or do they meet with you once a week?
Yeah, great question. So typically we see the athletes once a week, and then we send home exercises. So we see them once a week in office, typically about 45 minutes to an hour. And then I typically send home homework that's anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. So some of the exercises are for a certain amount of time. Some of it's kind of how long it takes you to do it. And typically we ask them to do the homework 5 days a week. Again, 5 days a week, 10 to 15 minutes, not too much.
So when you do it, do the gains or changes you make, does it stick long term?
Yeah. So another great thing about the vision training program is, so the term neuroplasticity. So it's the brain's ability to change in response to experience or response to doing new skills. So you go to the gym, you work out for 3 to 4 months, great, you make these excellent gains. The good thing about the vision therapy program is once we stimulate those pathways, or once we kind of recreate or strengthen those pathways in the brain, the brain doesn't revert back to the old inefficient way. So I always like to give patients an example. So, our office is in Lakeville. Let's say they're coming from Golden Valley, or let's say Plymouth. So by us, they're driving from Plymouth to Mankato to Northfield to Lakeville. Not efficient, doesn't work. So I say, okay, let's take out Mankato. Let's just go from Plymouth to Northfield to Lakeville. Again, still not efficient. Well, once the person realizes, wait a minute, I don't have to waste all this time going from point A to B to C. I can just go from Plymouth to Lakeville. Well, once you learn that more efficient pathway, you don't revert back to the old inefficient way. So that's the cool thing about it, is once you do it, typically it sticks unless there's a concussion, or sometimes with our younger patients, we kind of need to revisit. Yeah, typically once you go through the program, it sticks.
You have often recommended the book When Your Child Struggles. Can you tell the listeners or viewers what you like about that book and why you recommend it?
Yeah, I think there are so many things where, you look at, why does the kid struggle? Parents never want to see their kids struggle. And you want to try all these different things where, is it tutoring? Is it a reading specialist? Is it seeing a psychologist or psychiatrist? But you look at, again, I mentioned so much of what we process comes through the eyes. And if let's say an example, we've got a kid that struggles with reading. All right, let's really hit the reading tutor. They're going to see them 5 times a week. Well, if their visual system is not working in that efficient way, we're trying to throw something at the wall to see if it sticks. So once we kind of build on that visual foundation and they're able to actually perform these tasks, then we see that exponential increase in their reading speed or in their math or whatever they're looking to improve. But a lot of it is that just establishing that visual foundation and then kind of reinforcing the skills after that.
And then the next question I have about all that is, as they improve and they do the exercises, can they do those on their own later on?
Yeah. So typically once my athletes are done or once patients are done is I'll give them a series of exercises that they can do kind of here and there. And there's one exercise in particular that we get to. It's called the Brock string. It's a very basic, but kind of a high level complex exercise if you look at the physiology and neurology of what's happening as you're doing it. But once they're done, I kind of call it the Swiss Army knife of exercise. And it's a string with beads on it. And you just work on jumping your eyes from near to far, bead to bead. So it's convergence, divergence, accommodation. And a lot of the athletes, I'll say, hey, I want you to do this 15 to 20 seconds before you get out on the ice. So again, you train or you warm up the rest of your body. You can do the same thing with your eyes. And I know that even after I've gone through the program, from learning it as I started here and then going through it kind of another halftime after a concussion, I will always do a little vision warm up before. Now it's anytime I go golfing, I'll do a little exercise on the first tee box, 15, 20 seconds. And we've golfed together. You know, I bomb it down the fairway every single time on the first hole.
Yeah, straight.
Yeah.
Straight
so yeah. So again, I give them these exercises that they can do to kind of maintain, even though, again, once they have it, because of neuroplasticity, it sticks, but they'll still have exercises to kind of work on maintenance. And with that too, some of my athletes will complete the program, but I'll see them every summer before the season starts. So again, we'll use hockey as an example. I have a couple players that I'll see for the first 10, 15 sessions. And then I'll see them 3 to 6 sessions throughout the summer just to kind of fine tune those skills before tryouts or before the season starts.
Some of the clients we've had in common, there's been a couple of times where you've told me about how their vision performance diminishes or their reading performance diminishes when they're anxious. Can you say more about that and why that happens?
Yeah, so a lot of that comes down to, again, that flexing, where you look at what happens when you are anxious or when you are stressed. You kind of, it's human nature and it's our defense mechanism to kind of close off. I always say we're like turtles that crawl into the shell, where you kind of close off. And when you do that and you become hyper focused, it's harder to multitask or be more aware of your periphery. So I think it's just that, again, being able to maintain high levels of visual control or visual skills while you are under pressure. For example, I talked about academic versus sports vision training, where an academic may be a static exercise. I may have an athlete do 5 burpees and then get the heart rate up and then perform the eye exercise. Just because as we're playing sports, the heart rate's always elevated. So being able to perform while you're under those stressors is something that all athletes need to do.
So I remember one time we had an athlete that came to see you, and what you found was that like her peripheral vision was compromised, and like that meant that she was better running north and south really fast, but that her peripheral vision, like, it made her lateral movement less effective. Remember this person?
Yeah.
Can you say more about how that, because that was fascinating to me when it happened. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. Again, if you're looking at, a more linear movement, it's less visually demanding. So again, you're running in a straight line. You don't have to worry about kind of that peripheral awareness. And again, as you're moving, if you're playing soccer or hockey or basketball or any sport, when you're not having that movement, you need to move lateral, you need to move horizontal, you need to move in all these different directions. And part of it is just the body's proprioception, is knowing where you are in space and where you are in relation to where everything else is. And when you're able to control that accommodation or focusing system, a lot of time when you have that peripheral awareness, it helps with that, again, divided attention of moving left, moving right, moving forward, moving backwards. So I think that was something where once we established that and she knew more of where she was in space, that helped her with what she needed to work on.
Well, that and the other thing that I remember about her was that she really like your program really helped her academically to read. And what she told me is once she learned about what was happening with her eyes, her assumption went from when she didn't know that she was just dumb to, oh, I can work on this.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And we see that all the time where, kids, they come in with low self-esteem because they're not able to keep up with their peers. And you give them a couple extra tools and they say, oh, okay, well, this is why I really struggled with this. Or wait a minute, the words aren't moving on the page for everybody. Or I remember we had one patient came in and we said, do you ever see doubled? And he goes, what do you mean? And we said, well, do you ever see two of something when it's supposed to be one? And he was a soccer goal. And he goes, oh yeah, in soccer games, there's always two soccer balls coming at me. And his mom lost and she's like, why didn't you ever say that? Or why didn't you explain that? And a lot of kids, especially the younger kids, they only know how to see the way they know how to see. So they assume everyone sees the same way that they do. But once you realize the way you're supposed to see, which is, again, a more efficient way of seeing things, it makes things much easier. And then on the other hand, it makes them much more enjoyable.
Yeah. Well, and so it sounds like the training you do impacts like a wide variety of things, including mindset and like that kid. I think about like the learned helplessness she had developed over that time and how you gave her a path forward to get better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I also think the other thing that I often have seen is as their performance improves, they also feel like whether it's through vision or what I'm doing with them, they feel more confident to take on more challenges.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that confidence obviously is a huge piece. And even looking at the concussion patients that we work with, it's with a concussion, it's an invisible injury where you break your arm, you see there's a cast. With a concussion, a lot of times you can't see how much a patient is struggling. And with some concussion patients not being cleared to play sports, that's a lot of times their identity. And if they're not able to do that, obviously it's going to affect their self-esteem and it's going to affect their schoolwork. They're obviously, if they can't play sports, they're not going to be as happy. And even looking at some of the adults where they're not able to go to work or they're not able to play with their kids. And then once they're able to, again, bring their visual system back up and make their visual system work more efficiently, it can really be life-changing.
Yeah. So what I take from that too is that you work with a broad range of people.
Yep. So I always say the youngest I've worked with was 3, and the most mature was 82.
Wow, that's quite an age range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially some of the more mature patients, sometimes their independence is what they're fighting for. If they're not able to drive, well, that's what they want to be able to do. Or I worked with a 70-some-year-old stroke patient that struggled with just walking. And I remember my aunt went to church with this patient. She said, we saw him walk to get communion for the first time since his stroke. And he was able to do that all by himself. So again, you look at the wide range of patients. The younger kids struggle with reading, the stroke patients, and then professional athletes and everywhere in between.
So what I take from what you're saying is there's a large range of time frames and you can't put every situation into the same box, but there's a lot of different ways that you can help. And probably if someone is interested in working with you guys, the best thing to do is probably just to set up an appointment and figure out like what's going on and get an outline of how you can help.
Yeah, I think the first step would be to set up the evaluation. And I always tell patients, some patients come in and, parents will say, oh, I wish we did this years ago because they wouldn't have struggled this long. But I always say there's no wrong time to do it. Obviously, as a younger kid, you're addressing the deficiency earlier. But a lot of times when you're younger, you're not fully aware of the whole program or what you're doing. Or when you're older, you can understand more of what you're doing. But on the other hand, sometimes if we are working with older patients, they've got more of a compensation that they've built up because of the deficiency throughout their life. But again, it's just sometimes getting a little bit more deeper rooted. But at any age, you can make these improvements in your visual system.
So one of my questions for you was going to be like, you have specific case studies of, improvements that you've made, but you've really kind of answered that question already.
Sure. And one of the patients I love to highlight was he was actually a senior hockey player. They ended up winning a state championship his senior year. Started working with me. He had zero depth perception. And he wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, which obviously has very strict vision screenings. He went to the Air Force. They tested his vision, and they could tell something was up. So they tested him again. They tested him a third time, and he got 100% depth. He also got into West Point, kind of passed all the vision screenings and exercise screenings there. So he got accepted to both, but he ended up going to his fallback school, which ended up being an Ivy League school. Again, going from zero depth to 100% depth throughout the program, he saw so much improvement in his hockey. He wasn't going to play in college, but he ended up playing 4 years of Division I hockey. So that's kind of an extreme patient where, again, not being able to see depth at all to 100% to being able to pass the vision screening at the Air Force Academy is just incredible.
Yeah. Anything else you would like to share with the listeners and viewers about like how you can be helpful before we sign off?
Yeah, I think just one thing is, vision is much more than seeing 20/20. Again, if you can see clearly, can you change your focus? Because as we're playing sports, again, it's always dynamic. I talked about all the visual skills. Yes, if you can see clearly, but do your eyes work in an efficient way, similar to how a camera works, where, again, a camera is not just in one zoom. You have to be able to zoom in and out. You have to be able to expand the panorama. You have to be able to switch the angle, and your eyes and visual system really do the same thing. So again, just stressing that vision is not just about clarity. It's how the eyes work binocularly together.
All right. Well, great. Loved having you on. Always love talking with you. Love the work that you do with people. Everyone comes back extremely satisfied, and I see big gains every time you work with people. So keep up the good work. And thanks again for joining us today. Really value the relationships we've built over the years. And how would they contact you to get started?
Yeah, so you can check out our website, which is just vpcmn.com. Otherwise, you can Google Vision Performance Center in Minnesota. And I know I've mentioned to you, if they've got questions, you can share my number with them. They can give me a call, send me a text. I'd be happy to talk to them about the program and answer any questions and get them set up. But I wanted to thank you for having me on and appreciate the referral source you've been. I know that your athletes love working with you too. So hats off to you as well.
Yeah, thanks. Well, you have a great weekend, and thanks for joining me.
All right. Yep. You too. Thanks, Hans.
Yep.